The Retirement Cafe podcast, episode 93, How Isolation is Driving Financial Scams with Professor Keith Brown.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and Accredited Later Life Advisor, Justin King.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast, which is sponsored by My Financial Planner. Not knowing when you can afford to retire or what your pensions will provide you with can be worrying. My Financial Planner provides independent, fixed-fee retirement planning advice, bringing clarity to your financial future. At My Financial Planner, we take an expert look at your pension plans and we turn them into a retirement plan. We equipped you with the knowledge to be able to retire successfully. Find out more about getting a plan to fund the retirement you really want at myfinancialplanner.co.uk. I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast this week Professor Keith Brown, who joined me for episode 89 to chat about mental capacity. Take a listen if you didn't already have the chance, as it's a hugely informative conversation. Keith is government advisor on mental capacity, but also more broadly in adult care and safeguarding. To that end, Professor Brown sits on the Department of Health Adult Safeguarding Advisory Board. He also leads the national research into financial fraud and scams, and is here today to share his very personal story of how his own mother's experience made him passionate about helping protect older people from the growing prevalence of financial scams. He explains that whilst anyone can become a victim of financial fraud, isolation and loneliness are the biggest indicators, and what practical steps we can all take to protect ourselves and our loved ones. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Professor Keith Brown. Welcome back to the podcast, Keith Brown.
Absolute pleasure to be back with you.
Good. Keith, really great response to the podcast that we had before, all about mental capacity and all the documents that you can create and stuff. But we want to move on to scams. Now, tell me about your involvement in scams and your knowledge around that.
Yeah, it's a funny old world, really, because my life's really been in the field of healthcare and social care and social policy and social policy analysis. And yet suddenly I lead the national research into financial fraud and scams. And yet I'm not in the world of finance and I'm not an expert in finance. So what really happened was I wrote the national safeguarding framework many years ago for the government across health and social care. And I sort of have some expertise in the field of mental health and mental capacity. And a number of years ago, 7-8 years ago, I was approached by the Chartered Trading Standards Institute and the National Scams team to really help them understand capacity, consent, safeguarding in the field of scams. And it really resonated with me because at the time I was providing care for my own mother, who lived in the Christchurch area, and her capacity was starting to fail. She was in the early stages of dementia. And putting it bluntly, she kept on getting scammed. And I was really frustrated. Here I was, the professor of the National Centre, expert in this field, provides support and advice to 3 government departments, 3 government ministers, whoever they are. They keep changing, but I'm always there. And yet I couldn't protect my own mother. And it was actually really also quite interesting how difficult it was talking to my mother. I was in my earlier 50s then. I'm a bit older than that now. And I'd go to my mum and I'd say, Mum, do you know what's going on? And my mother was a northern lady from Lancashire. And she'd just turn around and say, it's all right, son, I know what I'm doing, bugger off, And I'm thinking, this is cool. I can't stop my own mum from being scammed. And these were not sometimes small sums of money.
Right.
She didn't lose everything because I put enough protection systems around her, which I'll talk about later. But I'm just saying it can happen to us all. And it genuinely happened to me and my mother. So I was really very eager and very keen to get involved in the whole area of understanding more about scams. And what was really quite frightening as we started our early work 7 or 8 years ago, with a realization there was virtually no research into this field at all. Scamming has been going on for a long time, but research and understanding of it's really only happened in the last few years. And I'm delighted that it's on the agenda and we're talking about it today, and it's on many financial advisors' agendas and others. But it's only because of the work we've done in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's taken that length of time to raise the public understanding and public consciousness of this as a topic. And so that's how I got into it, and that's where we are today.
Wow. So, I mean, where are we at today? I mean, we hear, huge amount of figures, people being scammed all the time, phone calls from God knows where, boiler rooms, all types of things that I've come across. And then I just think, well, how do you police this? How do you get the culprits, the perpetrators of this? I mean, okay, so there's that aspect. How do we stop people doing the scams? And then, of course, the other aspect of how do we make sure that we can protect anyone? I mean, if it's not just older people. I mean, obviously, you possibly become more vulnerable for this type of thing as you get older, but people of all ages can get scammed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the research told us very early on, we got an idea of the scale. So we started to estimate about £5 billion worth a year.
Wow.
And we're nearer to 10 billion, not million, but billion pounds a year of fraud and scams. And a realization that these were not just fly-by-night type people. This is serious and organized crime. I mean, putting it crudely, criminals have stopped doing domestic burglary. We've got too many TV cameras out there. They stopped doing car crime because we've all got better locks on our cars. And they've also, sadly enough, done what they call risk and reward basis. And they work out the risk of getting caught from scamming versus the reward of how much money they can get. This is the best sort of crime for them to be involved in.
Yeah.
So you're talking about serious criminals investing huge sums of money into systems and training to become better at it. And the defense from our end has been pretty slow. So, it really is very major business. Criminals started off with lots of mail post. So you got all these sort of phony letters through your door saying you've won £20,000, just give us £100 and we'll get it to you, sort of thing. There's the telephone calls, ringing people all the time. There's the online fraud. And you're right, it's not just older people. The key indicator, criminals want lonely, isolated people. They know if you've not got somebody close to you, you can what I call sense check. Does this look right? Does this feel right? Most of us know within a minute or two of being scammed that we've probably been scammed as we think about it. But in the heat of the moment, with a lot of pressure put on us, with somebody blasting at us down the telephone or hectoring us and ringing us morning, noon and night, sometimes people just give away the details, give away the bank details, send the check, give the money away. So isolation and loneliness is the biggest indicator. And therefore, we often do refer to older people as the biggest victim target because they're more likely to be isolated and lonely. And then, of course, sadly for a criminal, their best victim is somebody with cognitive impairment or the early stages of dementia. People that don't even realize they're being scammed. Mm. So I can scam you week after week after week, and you don't even know that you've ever been scammed. And so I'm ringing you up on a Friday at the end of the month because I want to sell you a product. I want to sell you some vitamins. I want to take money for a donation to a charity or whatever it is, because you don't remember that you bought the product, you bought the service, or you gave a donation last week, the week before, the week before, the week before, because your dementia, your cognitive impairment state means you forget. And the tragedy is that criminals refer to people like that as suckers. Mm. And they, on the dark internet and sometimes on the live internet, they trade and they sell the names and addresses and details of what people they call as suckers, and they call these things suckers lists. And you can go and you can buy the names and addresses of elderly, lonely people in the early stages of dementia so that you can commit crime against them. And that sort of data is really, really valuable. And we do detect some of these, and we do take some of these lists down, but they're pretty widely out there. And I think one of the things I want to say to all your listeners is this: if you or a loved one has been scammed on a telephone, via mail, or on the internet, remember that person's details will be traded remorselessly. It will be traded to other criminals within hours or days, and they will get bombarded. So if you've been scammed or your loved one's been scammed, immediately put in protection measures. Change the bank details, cut up the credit cards, get new ones. Think about call blocking technology devices. Put a stop on the mail. Use mail redirection service. Change the internet login protocols, whatever it is. Criminals will target you because they know you're an easy victim and an easy prey. So much so, they will pay good money to buy your details.
Wow. So tell me, Keith, I know that you've got a personal story with your mum and scams. Tell me a little bit about some of the circumstances that you observed with her.
So my mum had a bit of arthritis and was always worried about her arthritis. And somebody got hold of her details, and they started to ring her and sell her royal jelly, other vitamin supplements that would potentially prevent her or make her arthritis better. Now, my mother was quite a proud northern lady, and I only realised the scale of this when I went round to her house one day, and she had 4 or 5 black dustbin bags full of clothes. And I couldn't understand why clothes were in black dustbin bags rather than the cupboards or the wardrobes. And I thought she might have been going to the charity shop or throwing out some clothes or something, but these weren't super old clothes. These were just like her ordinary clothes.
Right.
And I went into a spare room and I started opening drawers, and I found drawer after drawer full of these vitamins, the vitamin supplements. And I couldn't understand why she had so many of these supplements until I realized that a company was phoning her frequently and selling stuff to her. In the space of 8 days, she was sold £2,500 worth of vitamin D. There was enough vitamin D sold to her in a week to have killed everybody on her road. It was of that scale.
Oh, my God.
In fact, a really funny story about this, in a sense, at the end, and it's a place not too far away from where you're living, Justin.
Yeah.
The GP surgery has a pharmacy involved in it.
Right.
And after my mother died and we cleared out the house, I went to the GP surgery, to the pharmacy, and said, I've got some medicines to return. And the gentleman got a tray out and put it on the counter, a big, big tray, and I smiled. My brother and I had 9 dustbin bags full of medicines and vitamins and vitamin supplements.
Oh, my gosh.
She's hiding them in the loft because she didn't know what to do with them. And her dementia had just got her confused as to what was going on. Yeah. The scale was enormous. So, yeah, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
Just that alone. Just imagine going to your loved one's home after they've passed away, checking out the loft and bringing out 4 boxes of royal jelly or whatever it was. It was crazy. I don't even know what royal jelly is. It's something that a bee produces, and it's meant to stop you getting dementia, right. And not dementia, arthritis.
Yeah.
It is that bad.
Wow.
And you just do not know what's happening to your loved ones. If you visit, I was visiting 3-4 times a week to support my mum, and yet this was going on under my nose. The only way I ended up stopping this was to take out a third-party mandate on a bank account so I could actually see day by day where her money was going and put in stop mechanisms when she was spending money, in what, most people would seem to be a crazy way, buying hundreds of pounds worth of vitamins.
Yeah. So, I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, what can we do?
If I'd have known what I know now, I would have got a call blocker, a telephone call blocker,
right,
to stop people ringing her to hound her for donations or to sell products. It's not just criminals, it's sometimes what I call legitimate companies acting in an illegitimate way. And in this case, it was a vitamins type company. Call blocking technology can be used for also, you can either block international calls, you can block all calls except some pre-programmed numbers. You have different levels of programming within the technology. That would really help very quickly. I had to redirect the post, and I went to the post office with my mother and got a redirection of all of her mail, simply because she was getting so many letters from sort of like false lotteries. And of course, somebody with dementia, my mother could read the letter that said, "Hello, Mrs. Brown, you've won £2,000, you've won £20,000. She could literally read it to me. But somebody with that level of dementia can't, what I call, cognitively process it. So they can't understand where it says at the bottom, this is actually a lottery. She believed she'd won £20,000, so she sent the money off. So I had to divert that sort of call away. The other one I got that was really frustrating, I won't name the charity, although they have since been prosecuted for this, but it was a well-known animal welfare charity that was sending photographs and pictures of emaciated dogs and cats and animals, saying, can you give a gift, a support to help stop the plight of these animals? Now, my mother ended up feeling terribly distressed at the sight of these photographs of these animals, feeling really emotionally committed to having to send lots of money to try and stop it, and just in a complete state. And what was frustrating was I rang up the charity and I said, can you stop doing this? Can you stop sending this mail to my mother? And their response was, no, we can't without the consent of your mother, because she's given us consent to send this mail. And I said, well, she's got dementia. Irrelevant. So they were basically asking me somehow to get my mother to write, she could never give consent anyway, a letter to say, stop doing this. In the meantime, these letters are arriving 2 or 3 times a week, and they're piling up at the front door. And in frustration, I learned far too late that the best way of doing this is get mail redirection.
Right. Okay. So what I'm hearing from you is that there's a number of, obviously there's some stuff being done on a national level, which is around policing and around trading standards and the good work that these guys are doing. And then there's the, it's a bit like, I always think to myself about having a good insurance policy on your house. But the best insurance policy on the house, of course, is to not get burgled or to not burn down and what have you. So, to watch my electrical items and make sure that they're all, tended to and have darn good locks on my valuables. And it's putting in those levels of protection, isn't it? So you mentioned, telephone service, maybe mail redirection, but the big thing, and I'm also hearing, and I'm not so sure how we tackle it. And I did interview Esther Ransom, was on the podcast a few episodes earlier than our chat today with Silverline.
Yeah.
The loneliness thing is this to me sounds like the big if we've got one lever to try and really attack, it's loneliness.
Yeah, absolutely. We're never going to stop scamming until we tackle loneliness. If people are so lonely, I am leading the national research into call blocking technology. In stage 1 of that research, putting it crudely, the research was getting messed up because some people were pulling the plug out of the call blocking technology because they'd rather have a phone call from a scammer than have nothing. And some people are so lonely, they'd rather talk to someone trying to defraud them of their life benefits than sit in a room all day on their own. You have to tackle loneliness. Yeah. And until we as society start to do that, we are really going to struggle. I think the other technology that all your listeners should be thinking about is TV technology, CCTV, doorbell cameras. That's really prevalent now. And, particularly the sort of doorbell camera where if somebody approaches your mother or your father or your grandparents' house, it will ping an image to you on your mobile phone anywhere in the world, and you can see and record who has been there. Because doorstep criminals, it's very difficult to A, prove they've been there, and B, prove what they've been doing unless you've got video evidence. So I would now, if my mother was still alive, I would have a doorbell camera and have a camera inside the house, almost just double check, has she fallen over? Is she waking up? Is she okay? So I could speak to her. Because particularly with people with dementia, you get that sense of, are they okay? Are they calling you? Are they stressed? But to be able to see the person on a camera is really quite reassuring rather than just being able to hear somebody. And I'd have the mail taken away. Of course, we're being very successful in this. We are taking scam mail out of the system. We are taking down lots of phone calls, but the criminals are just moving on to the internet. And COVID has been a realization for many of us, and indeed, hence the reason why we're doing this podcast rather than meeting in a hotel with a live audience probably, is because of COVID. We have to use technology. Technology is a wonderful thing, but criminals are learning how to use technology, make no mistake. And so protecting people on the internet with technology is going to be really difficult. And I think if your elderly relative has got some level of cognitive impairment, actually, you can't protect them. Honest on the internet, they're just going to get bombarded. Again, criminals will trade internet addresses, they'll trade emails, and you've got some difficult decisions to make here because clearly the internet is a useful way of us communicating with each other during lockdown.
Yeah.
My view is that when we get to the end of all of this, as well as all the kind of understandings of the pain of not being able to see your loved ones and being socially isolated and the difficulty that is for all of us, including me, one of the real tragedies is going to be recognizing the scale of fraud that's been going on to people in lockdown, because that's who the criminals want to target.
Yeah. And how, you may know the answer to this, but one of the things that I worry about with this COVID, the tracing kind of phone calls that we're possibly all going to receive to say that you've been with somebody who's now being diagnosed with COVID. How do we balance that off? Because I just think if I got a phone call like that, or an elderly relative got a phone call like that, they'd be initially terrified.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And is it real?
Yeah. And what does it mean? And who's it coming from? I think we just need to remind all the listeners that nobody will ever ask for your bank details. Nobody will ever ask for your personal details and your PIN numbers. And so immediately, if someone's straying into those areas, it's a fraud. Be careful with telephone numbers, particularly caller ID numbers. Please remember that we can all go out there now and buy bits of software kit, which means we can pretend to be anybody. I can ring you up and pretend to be your bank, you're a financial advisor, your neighbor, your loved one, anybody. I can plug in any number that's on the earth and pretend to be that number. So just because the right number comes up does not mean I am the person who I'm purporting to be. Emails are much harder to scam. So the track and trace stuff, the NHS emails that you'll get received should be, if it's the correct email IP address, it will be the right person. But how many of us know how to check the email IP address to that level of detail? And if it looks like it's rather than nhs.com, nhs1.com or something like that, will often respond. So just be very, very careful about giving out information. And I think you're right. I think we're going to see an awful lot of crime going in that area through post-COVID.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think we've just got to impress on everybody. I mean, it's very nice for my clients because, of course, I just say, you get anything like that, you just forward it to me. You get a phone call, you just ask them to ring me. You get an email, just send it across to me and I'll tell you whether it's right or not. And I'll take responsibility for it. But there's an awful lot of the community, you don't have someone like me. So the trick is, I always think about, when we're presented with a problem, I always want to look at it. What is the solution that I can do as an individual? I can't change policy. You possibly can. I'm not influential like that. But in my community, we have a number of elderly relatives. We obviously live in an elderly community area. We know an awful lot of them, really, by first name terms, and we go and have a cup of tea, and we see them every week. And all the elderly neighbours down our road, we know. And I think that's the trick: is just what can you do if you are listening to this? What can you do? If you can go and meet 4 or 5 elderly people who say, and just be their reassurance when they are stuck with some technology or there's something they're not sure of. Because actually, if every one of us went out and had 5 contacts like that, we'd solve the problem of loneliness, and we'd solve the problem of having someone to reach to, and this would disappear.
Justin, you're absolutely right. It is literally about going to those neighbours and friends and saying, if you're unsure, ask me. If you're not sure, send it to me and I'll deal with it. And the real tragedy, and an interesting part of it is, Justin, is that you're a financial advisor almost becoming a social worker. And how many financial advisors are becoming more than financial advisors, becoming almost life advisors and support workers? And it's brilliant that you're doing that. And I think it's a key and important role that you've got. But of course, only a small proportion of society will have financial advisors like you. And so we're going to have to open up this much broader sense of neighbourliness and goodwillness and supporting of each other. And maybe that is something that can come out of COVID that's a positive and a good thing. That kind of sense, we want to clap for the NHS on a Thursday. We want to put the rainbows up. We want to be a community again. And like after the war, there is a greater sense of pulling together, and maybe post-COVID, that greater sense will mean that we will look after each other more and look out for each other more. And it is sometimes just as simple as you're suggesting, just saying, if you're unsure, ask me. If you're not clear, show me, and I'll deal with it for you.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of financial advisors do kindly listen into this podcast. And I do ask you, maybe, what could you do as a local firm in your local community? Could you be, you don't have to take these people on as clients, but could you just be the resource that if someone needed to pick up the phone, they could just check in with you, whether something was kosher or not kosher, and you could give a bit of advice. Wouldn't cost you much time to do that, and it would serve your community. So maybe that's a call to action for advisors across the UK.
Absolutely, advisors, but it's advisors, lawyers, accountants, bank staff, building society staff. If you look at the scale of and the size of all of those people, there's quite a lot of people involved in financial services in its broadest sense.
Yeah.
And all we need to do is, as you rightly say, we've only got to cover 5 people each, and it's done. It's not 50, no. 5 or 10.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, once again, Keith, it's been absolutely fascinating to chat with you this afternoon. I really appreciate your time and the great work that you're doing for everyone, and all the guides that you're putting together. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes so they can find you again and download all those guides that you've carefully prepared with you and your team. Really, really do appreciate it. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure, and I just hope that any listener at any time from this gets some sort of sense of not fear. We need to recognise the scale of the problem, and it's a real problem, but enjoy living and enjoy living with each other in community. Let's support each other and actually just do something about it. And if you do want to email me or contact me, please feel free to do so. I will try and get back to you. Honestly, I don't think I ignore anybody, but you can be amazed, and maybe not so amazed how many email traffic I do get on these subjects. But I will get back to you. And it is, as you can tell from my stories about my own mother, interesting. My mother's passed away now. She died a few years ago. And I think I'm still really passionate about this subject because I'm still in that mind. As a son, I wasn't always able to protect her. Well, I'm going to do my best to make sure I can protect and help other people. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. A huge thank you to Professor Keith Brown for taking time out of his very busy schedule to share his expertise with us. To find out more about Keith and the work he does, check out the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll find all the useful links to what we've discussed today. You can also listen again to episode 65, where I chatted with Louise Baxter-Scott, who heads up the scams team for National Trading Standards, and she shared her top tips for protecting us all from scams. And you'll find a link to Keith's interview on episode 89 about understanding mental capacity. As ever, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a review on iTunes and be sure to subscribe either on our website or your preferred podcast player so you never miss an episode. Thank you also to my financial planner, the Fixed Fee Retirement Planning Specialist, for sponsoring the podcast. You can find out more about how they can help bring clarity to your retirement at myfinancialplanner.co.uk. So until next time, this is Justin King helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Cafe podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.